He thought it was just another quiet visit to his restaurant, until Keanu Reeves opened the freezer and found a shivering child inside. What happened next didn't just expose a hidden tragedy. It forced everyone to confront the silence they'd been ignoring. But the real question is, how did the boy get there, and who left him? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air still clung to the scent of wet asphalt and fading thunder. Keanu Reeves stepped out of his car without a word. No bodyguard, no assistant, no camera flashing from across the street. Just him and the quiet pulse of midnight pressing against the sidewalks of downtown Los Angeles. He pulled the collar of his black coat a little higher and walked along the narrow alley behind the tall brick building, the side entrance of the Ember Room dimly lit by a flickering bulb overhead. This wasn't a night for attention. It never was. Keanu didn't visit the restaurant for the food or the recognition. He came for the silence, for the breath between the chaos. A place he had built not just with investment capital, but with vision, sweat, and a yearning for something real. He had always believed in places that could hold meaning without spectacle. He unlocked the side door with a soft click and stepped inside. The hallway welcomed him like an old friend, dim and familiar, with the faint smell of rosemary, lemon oil, and flour lingering in the air. The buzz of a distant dishwasher echoed from the kitchen, joined by the low hum of walk-in coolers and quiet footfalls of a skeleton crew finishing cleanup for the night. It was just past 10:45. Most of the dinner crowd had gone home, and the restaurant had shifted into its nighttime rhythm, winding down, lights lowered, music barely audible. A few members of the staff glanced up as Keanu passed through the prep area. One of the line cooks gave a polite nod. Another, drying a pan, looked startled, for only a moment before quickly returning to work. They were used to this. Keanu wasn't the kind of owner who barked orders or walked in expecting attention. He had always made it clear, this place wasn't about his name. It was about the people who made it work every night. The kitchen crew, the servers, the dishwashers. The ones who stayed late and arrived early. His presence was quiet, observant. Most nights he would sit alone at a corner table with a glass of water, watching, not judging, just being part of the space. Tonight, though, something was different. He moved past the baking station and through the back corridor where aprons hung in uneven rows and mop buckets leaned into corners, a hallway that led toward the storage rooms and the massive steel walk-in freezer at the far end. His footsteps were slow, steady, no particular urgency, until he heard it. Sound, small, barely there. He stopped walking. At first, he thought it might have been the hum of the ventilation system, maybe the loose metallic rattle of a cooling fan deep in the walls. But the tone wasn't mechanical. It wasn't air moving or compressors switching on. It was softer than that. Fragile. A whimper. He held his breath for a moment, eyes narrowing as he listened. The hallway was quiet again, but the stillness didn't bring comfort. It made the air feel heavier. The scent of basil and garlic that had followed him through the prep line seemed to dull, replaced by something colder, not quite fear, but definitely alert. He took one step forward, then another. As he reached the midpoint of the corridor, near the dry storage racks, the sound returned. Faint, muffled, trembling. A high-pitched whimper that came in short gasps. Keanu turned his head toward the steel walk-in freezer door. It was closed, as it always was when not in use. A heavy industrial door with no lock. Just the standard air pressure seal to keep it closed. He stared at it for a few seconds. The noise didn't come again, but the silence that followed felt wrong, like something had been disturbed, something that didn't belong. Keanu moved toward the freezer slowly, his footsteps light against the polished tile, The rubber soles of his boots barely made a sound. His coat swayed slightly with each step, damp from the mist that had gathered earlier in the night. His hand reached out and paused just before the door handle. He felt the cold seeping through the metal. It wasn't unusual for the walkhead to run colder at night, especially when it was fully stocked, but there was something about this moment that made him hesitate. Not out of fear, out of caution. As if what he was about to open wasn't just a storage space, but a secret waiting to be uncovered. He gripped the handle. He took one slow breath and pulled. The door swung open with a soft creak, followed by a gust of cold air that rushed out like a whisper from another world. The sudden temperature shift fogged his glasses slightly and bit at the exposed skin on his neck. Inside, rows of metal shelves stood in neat order, stacked with sealed tubs of soup base, crates of root vegetables, trays of vacuum-packed proteins. Everything in its place, except for one thing. In the far corner of the freezer, barely visible behind a box of frozen spinach and a row of stacked baking trays, something moved. Not a sudden jerk or shuffle, just a shift. Small, deliberate, and trembling. Keanu stepped into the cold without hesitation, letting the door close softly behind him. The freezer light buzzed above his head, casting a bluish hue across the stainless steel shelving. Frost clung to the corners of cardboard boxes. A misty fog curled around his legs as he moved slowly toward the back. And there, tucked into the narrow space between the lower shelf and the wall, was a child, a boy, no older than 8, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped tightly around his shoulders, head buried beneath the hood of a thin, too small jacket. His frame was barely more than a silhouette in the cold light, shivering, silent, fragile. Keanu crouched slowly, careful not to startle him. He didn't move too close, just low enough for the boy to see him. His voice, when it came, was calm and low. "Hey," he said gently. "It's okay. You're not alone." The boy didn't respond at first, but his head shifted slightly. His face peeked out from beneath the hood, wide, glassy eyes locked onto Keanu's like he wasn't sure what he was seeing. Not a threat, not quite safety either. Just a presence. Keanu shrugged off his coat and laid it beside the boy. His hands moved with purpose, but not pressure. "You don't have to talk," he said softly. "But if you're cold, this might help." A pause. The boy looked at the coat. Then, slowly, so slowly, he reached out and gripped the edge of it with trembling fingers. That was enough. Keanu moved closer, gently wrapping the coat around the boy's small frame. The fabric was already damp with freezer mist, but it was warmer than nothing. Carefully, Keanu lifted the boy into his arms. He weighed almost nothing. As he turned toward the door, the boy buried his face into Keanu's chest. No words, no sound. Just shivering and the faintest grip on the coat's edge. Keanu stepped out of the freezer and into a kitchen that had suddenly gone still. Every pair of eyes turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A towel dropped from someone's hand. No one spoke. They didn't look at Keanu. They looked at the boy in his arms, and the silence that followed was heavier than the cold. The cold didn't bother him, not in that moment. What pierced Keanu more deeply than the freezer's icy air was the shape of the boy's body, curled tightly in a space that had never meant to hold life. He wasn't crying, not anymore. The whimpers had faded into a shallow silence that sent a deeper chill down Keanu's spine than the freezing air around him. Keanu knelt on one knee, the floor biting through his pants, but he didn't flinch. He kept his voice low, soft enough that it wouldn't feel like pressure. "You're okay," he said again. "You're safe now. I'm here." The boy didn't move. His face, pale and slightly blotched from the cold, peeked out from beneath the oversized hood. His eyes were wide, almost too wide, as if frozen open from more than just temperature. It was fear. A fear that didn't have words yet. A fear that had been tucked inside a walk-in freezer while the world spun outside. Keanu slowly reached for the hem of his coat again, holding it open. It was a gesture, not a command, a choice. He let the boy decide. If you're cold, this can help, I promise. Another long pause. Then the boy shifted. His fingers twitched. He didn't speak, but his eyes dropped to the coat, and then, almost imperceptibly, he inched forward. Not by much. Just enough. Keanu held his breath. The boy reached for the coat again, slower this time. He gripped it, not with desperation, but with hesitation. He didn't unwrap himself from his own arms. He didn't suddenly fall into Keanu's chest. He just held on to the coat like it was the only thing in the world that made sense. That was enough. Keanu leaned forward gently, careful not to startle him. He moved closer only when the boy didn't pull away. He draped the coat around the child's shoulders and tucked it beneath his arms. The warmth wasn't much, but it would hold for now. "Can I carry you out?" Keanu asked softly. "We don't have to talk." "But you shouldn't stay here." No answer, just a nod. Small, faint, barely visible through the shadows of the freezer light. Keanu slid one arm under the boy's knees, the other behind his back. The child was frighteningly light, his limbs stiff from the cold. His breath came in shallow bursts, and as Keanu rose to his feet, he felt the boy's head fall gently against his chest. The freezer door creaked again as Keanu opened it with his shoulder. Warm air met them like a wave, and for a second, the sudden contrast made Keanu's eyes sting. But it wasn't the air. It was the silence that greeted him next. The kitchen had gone still. It wasn't the typical quiet of a post-service cleanup. It was deeper, sharper. The kind of stillness that pressed into walls and held its breath. Keanu stepped out slowly, carrying the boy close, wrapped in his coat like a fragile parcel. His boots made soft sounds on the tile floor, but no one spoke. No one moved. To his left, a sous chef who had been plating leftovers stood frozen, spoon midair. A dishwasher stopped loading a tray. A prep cook leaned against the sink with wide eyes, a rag clutched in her hand like she didn't know what it was for anymore. They weren't staring at Keanu, not exactly. They were staring at what was in his arms. A child, no more than 8, maybe younger, shivering, small, out of place in every possible way. Keanu didn't break stride. He didn't scan the room or demand answers. He didn't even speak. His pace was steady, purposeful, calm. One hand under the boy's knees, the other cradling his back. The boy's hood slipped slightly, revealing pale skin and damp hair clinging to his forehead. His hands clutched the edge of the coat with barely visible strength, fingers curled like leaves caught in frost. The staff instinctively stepped aside, not because they were told to, but because something about the moment demanded space. Reverence. Stillness. The weight of it had filled the air. Keanu turned the corner and pushed through the swinging door into the break room. The lights inside flickered as they always did, old bulbs in cheap sockets, but tonight they felt dimmer than usual, softer. Like even the electricity understood something delicate was unfolding. He laid the boy gently on the break room couch. The cushions were cracked, worn from years of late-night meals and exhausted feet, but it held. The coat slipped slightly as he adjusted the boy's position, so Keanu tucked it tighter around him. Then he moved to the corner supply shelf, grabbed a folded fleece blanket, and placed it gently over the child's shoulders. Still no questions, still no rush. He opened a bottle of water and set it on the floor nearby, within reach but not forced. "I'm not going anywhere," Keanu said quietly. "You can rest. No one's going to make you do anything. You're safe now." The boy's eyes stayed on the ceiling. He didn't blink, but he wasn't trembling as much anymore. His breathing, though shallow, had begun to settle. It was progress. Fragile, but real. Keanu crouched beside the couch, resting one elbow on his knee. He didn't speak again. He didn't ask for the boy's name or try to make him explain anything. He just stayed. Time passed. 10 minutes, maybe 15. The quiet in the break room was broken only by the soft hum of a vending machine in the corner and the occasional drip of a nearby faucet. Then, finally, the boy whispered something. He was almost too quiet to hear. Just a sound at first, but then a word formed. One single word. Teresa. Keanu leaned in slightly, careful not to make it feel like pressure. Teresa, he repeated gently. The boy nodded. His lips moved again, but he said nothing else. He gripped the blanket tighter, eyes fluttering briefly before finding Keanu's face again. Keanu stood slowly. He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped out a quick message. Seconds later, Hector appeared in the doorway, hesitant, confused, eyes bouncing between Keanu and the child on the couch. "Lock the doors," Keanu said in a low voice. "No one leaves until we figure out who this child is." Hector stiffened. "Sir, I found him in the freezer," Keanu said. The words were quiet, heavy. That was enough. Hector didn't argue. He turned and disappeared back into the kitchen. Within minutes, the restaurant's outer doors were secured. The remaining staff were gently pulled into the dining area. No panic, no accusations, just order, quiet urgency. Keanu stayed in the break room. He returned to the couch, lowered himself back down to the same position beside the boy. The child had turned slightly, not away from Keanu, but toward him, barely. His shoulder leaned into the cushion. The coat was still wrapped around him, and the fleece blanket rested just below his chin. "What's your name?" Keanu asked gently. No answer. That was okay. Not everyone speaks the first time they're given safety. Keanu stayed there, still and steady. He didn't look at his phone again. He didn't pace. He just listened. Not to the kitchen, not to the voices outside, but to the quiet rhythm of a child learning how to breathe again. The stillness in the break room wasn't like the silence in the freezer. It wasn't cold or empty. It wasn't terrifying. It was healing. It was the sound of someone beginning to feel seen. The child's eyelids lowered slightly. He hadn't closed them completely, but it was enough to suggest that maybe, just maybe, sleep was something he might trust again. Keanu leaned back against the wall, eyes watching, not with worry, but with something else. Because someone had put a child in a freezer, and now that the silence had been broken, nothing would be the same. Keanu stood quietly by the couch, the chill from the freezer still lingering in the sleeves of his shirt. The boy was wrapped tightly in his coat, and the fleece blanket added another layer of warmth. The fabric clung slightly to the child's thin shirt, damp from the condensation that had formed in the freezer. Keanu picked up the bottle of water again and unscrewed the cap. He didn't hold it out. He didn't urge. He simply set it down beside the couch, close enough for the boy to reach when he was ready. The boy didn't move. His eyes remained open but not alert. He was staring at the ceiling like it was the only thing in the world that didn't shift beneath him. His hands were clutching the blanket near his chest, small knuckles white from tension. Keanu lowered himself to the floor again, resting his back against the wall beside the couch. He sat close, but not too close. Enough to be felt, not forced. Minutes passed in silence. Keanu didn't break it. He didn't fill it with questions or comfort or instructions. The boy had already been through more than words could touch. So he just stayed. Finally, a sound, barely more than a breath. "Tia," the boy whispered. Keanu looked up gently. "Tia?" he repeated. The boy nodded once. His voice was hoarse, thin. "My Tia, Teresa." The name settled in Keanu's chest. He nodded slowly, not to press, just to acknowledge. The employee who dared to move, then helps my point. "Thank you." The boy said nothing more. His eyes dropped back to the ceiling. But there was a slight change in his breathing now. A little less shallow, a little less tight, as if speaking her name, just that one word, had released something locked up inside. Keanu stood. He moved with deliberate care, stepping just outside the break room doorway, pulling his phone from his pocket. His fingers moved with precision, typing a quick message. A moment later, Hector arrived. The head chef's face was pale, his expression unsure. He hadn't spoken to Keanu since the moment in the freezer. Now he stood at the threshold, eyes bouncing between Keanu and the child on the couch. "Lock the doors," Keanu said calmly. "Make sure no one leaves the building until we figure this out. No panic, just control." Hector hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Understood. And one more thing," Keanu added. "I need the clock-in records for every employee who accessed the freezer or dry storage tonight. I want to know who's been near that space in the last 6 hours." "I'll get them," Hector said. "Thank you," Keanu replied, his voice even. "No one else comes in here. Let him rest." Hector gave a final nod, then disappeared down the hallway. Keanu stepped back into the break room and quietly pulled the door until it latched. The space was warm compared to the freezer, but still dim, the overhead light flickering just enough to feel old, but not forgotten. The couch creaked softly as the boy shifted, adjusting the blanket that clung to his narrow shoulders. He hadn't touched the water, he hadn't said anything more, but his body was no longer rigid. That was something. Keanu returned to the same spot on the floor, leaning against the wall, watching without watching. His mind moved carefully through what he now knew. There was a boy named, possibly Noah, maybe not, maybe Teresa's nephew, left in the freezer of his own restaurant, a place that was supposed to mean warmth, safety, and control. But this was something else entirely. He took out his phone again, this time not to message anyone, just to check the time. Almost 11:30. The restaurant was technically closed, but there were still staff in the building, cleaning, wrapping up, resetting for the morning. None of them expected what had just happened. Keanu stared ahead at the vending machine across the room. Its hum filled the silence, mechanical and mundane. He focused on the rhythm of it, the predictable noise. The contrast between that and the night's chaos grounded him in a strange way. The boy coughed. Just once. Keanu turned his head, alert but gentle. The boy's eyes were closed now, or maybe just resting, halfway. "You're doing good," Keanu said softly. "You're safe." The boy didn't respond, but the stillness had shifted again, no longer brittle, just fragile. Keanu didn't try to explain who he was. It didn't matter right now. He didn't ask more questions, didn't pry into why the boy was there or how he got inside the freezer. That would come later. For now, it was enough to stay. A soft knock came at the door. Keanu stood, opened it only a few inches. Hector was there, holding a clipboard and a sheet of printed logins. "These are the clock-in records for tonight," Hector said, voice hushed. "Anyone unusual?" Keanu asked. "There was a late addition to the prep shift," Hector replied. "Teresa Mendoza. She wasn't scheduled until tomorrow, but she called in asking to pick up extra hours. I approved it. Didn't think anything of it." Keanu took the clipboard and studied the logs. Teresa had signed in around 5:15 p.m. Most other kitchen staff had signed out by 10:00. "Where is she now?" Keanu asked. "In the back pantry, inventory. Keep her there for now. Don't say anything." Hector nodded. "You want me to bring her in?" "Not yet," Keanu replied. "I need to know more first." Keanu stepped back into the break room, closing the door softly behind him again. He returned to the spot beside the couch and lowered himself onto the floor once more. The boy was watching now, not wide-eyed, not scared, just quiet, present. A small hand had found the edge of the fleece blanket and was rubbing it between two fingers, a subtle, instinctive motion. The water bottle remained untouched. Keanu didn't push it. He simply nodded once toward it, then looked back at the boy. "I heard you say Teresa," Keanu said gently. "Is she your tia?" The boy gave a barely visible nod. Keanu waited, but there was no further reply. That was okay. He sat back, feeling the edge of something rising in him, a kind of weight that didn't feel like anger or even urgency. It was responsibility. Deep, unmistakable, heavy. A child had been left in a freezer, in a place he had built with his own hands, and until tonight, no one had noticed. It was a failure, not just of one person, but of the system they had all silently agreed to. Keanu glanced at his phone again, then looked back to the boy. "Do you want me to call someone?" he asked. No answer. "Is Teresa still here?" "In the restaurant." The boy blinked. His lips moved slightly, then stilled. Keanu softened his voice again. "It's okay if you don't know. You don't have to say anything else." Silence returned. This time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't cold. It was waiting. Not for answers, but for safety to arrive fully. The boy finally whispered something new. He said, "Just until break." Keanu leaned in slightly. "She told you to wait until her break?" The boy nodded. "I was cold," he added, voice small. "But she said it was quick." Keanu exhaled slowly. Not frustration, not disbelief, just grief. The kind that comes from understanding too much, too late. He stood again, walked to the corner, and looked through the break room window toward the hallway. Beyond the prep area, the kitchen had grown quiet again. Most of the staff had been moved to the front dining room by now. But Keanu didn't want anyone else in this space. Not yet. He turned back to the couch, saw the boy curled now on his side, the coat and blanket forming a cocoon. Keanu nodded to himself once, then pulled out his phone. This time, he didn't hesitate. He called a contact, someone in local protective services. No headlines, no reports, just a quiet request. He gave the boy's condition, asked for help, not punishment. And then he waited, standing at the door, watching over a child who had been hidden in the cold, and swearing silently he wouldn't be ignored again. The clipboard felt heavier in Keanu's hands than it should have. It wasn't just a list of clock-in records anymore. It was a map of decisions, the kind that had nearly cost a child his life. He ran his finger down the printed list until it stopped on a single name: Teresa Mendoza. Clock-in time, 5:14 p.m. Position, prep cook. Notes, unscheduled edition, approved by Hector. Keanu tapped his phone and pulled up the internal employee directory. Teresa's contact file included a partial address, Oak Hill Complex, Unit 4B. He'd passed that stretch of road more times than he could count, tucked behind a faded gas station and a payday loan office with flickering neon lights. He'd never thought twice about it. Now he couldn't stop thinking. He moved quickly. No press. No driver. No calls. He left the break room with a final glance at the couch, where the boy now slept, curled under the blanket, breathing more steadily. Hector nodded from the hallway, signaling the building was still locked down. Keanu pushed through the side exit and into the cool night air. The pavement glistened from earlier rain. His car sat just where he'd left it, unremarkable, dark, anonymous. He got in and started the engine. The drive to Oak Hill took less than 20 minutes, but every second felt sharpened by the edges of what-ifs. What if he hadn't come in that night? What if the boy had been left another hour, 2? What if no one had heard the sound? The streets narrowed as he turned off the main road. The apartment complex came into view, a row of worn 2-story units with cracked balconies and broken blinds. Rust streaks marked the stair rails. A dim light flickered in a hallway window above the laundry room. The paint on the leasing office door was peeling, and the mailbox slots were stuffed unevenly. He parked at the far edge of the lot and got out slowly. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and wet concrete. A dog barked in the distance, then went silent. He climbed the stairs one at a time. Each step echoed faintly in the stairwell. Unit 4B was at the end of the second floor. The door was brown, its paint chipped and flaking near the edges. A single number 4 clung to the surface, with one bent nail. The B had fallen off, replaced with a marker scrawl next to the peephole. Keanu stood still for a second, then knocked. Once, twice, not loud, just firm. Silence. Then he heard it. Footsteps inside, a shuffle, a pause. The chain clicked. The door creaked open 2 inches. A tired face appeared behind it. The woman's eyes were sunken with exhaustion, framed by dark circles and fine lines. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, strands escaping at her temples. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days, or maybe weeks. But her eyes locked on Keanu like she recognized him, and yet couldn't believe he was real. "You're," she started to say. "I'm the owner of the Ember Room," Keanu said gently, cutting through the recognition. "I found a child in our walk-in freezer tonight." The woman's face went pale. Her hand dropped from the chain. She stepped back, letting the door swing open. Keanu stepped inside, slowly. The apartment was small and dim. One overhead bulb flickered in the corner. The couch was covered in unfolded laundry. A mattress lay on the floor against the far wall, beside a battered nightstand with a dented lamp. Toys were scattered in one corner, worn, mismatched. A crayon drawing of a sun was taped above the light switch. She closed the door behind him and turned, her shoulders already trembling. Is he okay?" she asked, her voice cracking. "He's alive," Keanu said, his tone even. "Sleeping now, warm. We didn't call police. Not yet." Tears welled instantly in her eyes, but she didn't cry. Not fully. Not yet. She pressed her hand over her mouth, as if trying to stop something from pouring out. "I wasn't supposed to bring him," she said softly. "I know I shouldn't have." "Tell me," Keanu said. She lowered herself into the nearest chair, one leg of it wobbling slightly under her weight. She looked down at her hands, fingers knotted together. "He's not mine," she began. "He's my nephew, Noah. My sister, she disappears sometimes, days at a time. This time it's been 3 days. No calls, no messages. She does this every few months, and every time I tell myself it'll be different, that she'll come back, that she's trying." Keanu listened, silent. "I couldn't leave him here alone," she continued. "Not again. I don't have anyone, no friends I can ask for help, no babysitter who'll take him last minute. I couldn't afford to miss another shift. They already cut my hours last month. Rent's due in 3 days? So you brought him with you," Keanu said quietly. She nodded. "I told him to stay in the back pantry. I wrapped him in my coat, gave him a snack, and told him it'd only be for a little while. Just until my break." Her voice broke then. She covered her face with both hands. "I forgot," she whispered. "I got pulled to help in the prep line. I was only supposed to be there 20 minutes. It turned into hours. I didn't mean to, I swear." Keanu didn't respond right away. He stood there in the center of the room, letting her words settle. The sound of a neighbor's television echoed faintly through the wall. Outside, a car horn blared in the distance, then silence again. She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "I know what it looks like," she said. "I know I messed up, but I swear, I love him. He's all I have left. I never meant to hurt him. I didn't know what else to do." Keanu moved closer, slowly, not to intimidate her, but to make sure she saw his eyes. "Could have died in there," he said softly. She nodded, her head dropping again. I know that now. I've been thinking about nothing else since I noticed the time. I ran back there on my next break, and he was gone." I thought he'd wandered off. I thought I'd lost him forever." She collapsed into her hands again, rocking slightly. Keanu sat across from her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't say what others might have. He just looked at her, not with anger, but with clarity. "You didn't act out of cruelty," he said. "You acted out of desperation, but the outcome could have been the same." "I know," she whispered. He took out his phone again. "Are you going to report me?" she asked quietly, eyes brimming with dread. "I'm going to ask for help," Keanu replied. "Not to punish you, but to make sure you're not left like this again." She didn't answer. She just sat there, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I believe you care about him," Keanu said. "But care isn't enough. Not when he's cold. Not when he's alone." She nodded again. "I won't run. I'll do whatever it takes." "You're not running," Keanu said. "You're starting over." He stood and looked around the apartment one last time. The cracked picture frame on the counter, the drawings taped to the fridge, the sleeping bag tucked into the corner. A child had been living here, but barely. Surviving. Waiting. "I have to go back now," he said. "Noah's going to wake up, and he's going to need someone who knows how to listen." She rose slowly, shaky, like her legs had forgotten how to hold her. "I'll come," she said. "Just tell me where." Keanu nodded once. He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The rain had started again, light, steady. Behind him, Teresa Mendoza stood still in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes on the ground. And for the first time that night, she wasn't alone in the silence. The drive back to the Ember Room was silent. Teresa sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap, fingers twisted in the hem of her sweater. Keanu didn't speak. Not yet. He kept his eyes on the road, navigating through the wet streets, letting the sound of the windshield wipers fill the air between them. The silence wasn't cold. It wasn't judgment. It was space. Space for truth to settle. When they pulled into the alley behind the restaurant, Keanu cut the engine and turned toward her. The glow of the dashboard lit her face, pale and hollow. "He's inside," he said quietly. "Still sleeping." She nodded, but her voice was caught in her throat. Keanu didn't get out right away. He sat with her in the car for another moment, watching the rain slide down the windshield in thin, wavering lines. "I need you to understand something," he said gently. She turned her head toward him, eyes wide, prepared for the worst. "If I hadn't come in tonight," Keanu continued, "he might not have made it. Another hour, maybe 2. That freezer isn't meant for people. It's airtight. The temperature drops below freezing within minutes." Her face crumbled. She covered her mouth with one hand, and a strangled breath escaped her. "I forgot," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I swear, I didn't." "I believe you," Keanu said, calm but firm. "But what almost happened wasn't because of cruelty. It was because you've been pushed too far for too long. And you didn't ask for help." She nodded, tears welling again, rolling down her cheeks now. "I thought I could handle it," she said. "I thought if I just kept working, just made it to payday. I didn't want to seem like I couldn't do it. I didn't want to lose the job. I've already lost so much." Keanu looked at her for a long time. Not with pity, but with understanding. He'd seen that same fear behind the eyes of others, people barely holding it together, afraid that asking for help meant losing everything. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. She watched him, terrified. "Are you calling the police?" she asked quietly. "No," he replied. "I'm calling someone who can help, real help, not punishment." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm calling protective services," he said, "but not to report you as a danger. I want them to see what's going on. I want them to see how close this came to becoming a tragedy. I want them to know you're trying. But more than anything, I want them to offer you support, not threats." Teresa shook her head, as if trying to wake herself from a nightmare she couldn't escape. "But once they know, Once I'm in the system, what if they take him? Her voice was trembling. He's not even mine, but I'm the only one who takes care of him. What if they think I'm unfit? Keanu kept his voice level. If we do nothing, he said, this will happen again. Somewhere else, to someone else, maybe worse. But if we show them the truth, if we're honest about what happened and why, then maybe we can build something better for both of you. Teresa stared at the dashboard, silent. Her hands were shaking in her lap. I'm so tired, she finally whispered. I haven't slept right in weeks. I wake up every time he coughs. I work 2 jobs. I take the bus. I buy groceries with coins. Every time I think I've caught up, something else happens. Rent goes up. My sister disappears again. He outgrows another pair of shoes. I didn't know what else to do. Keanu nodded, slowly. You've been surviving, not living. She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. What if I don't deserve help? He paused before answering. You do, he said simply. And so does he. It broke something. Her face folded inward as she let the tears come. Shoulders heaving, mouth open, no words. Just the collapse of everything she'd been holding up for too long. She pressed her face into her hands and cried in the passenger seat of Keanu Reeves's car, not because she was ashamed, but because no one had ever told her it was okay to fall apart. Keanu didn't touch her, he didn't offer tissue or advice. He just stayed, letting her unravel in peace. When her sobs finally slowed, she wiped her cheeks with her sleeve. Okay, she said. If you think this will help, I'll do it. Keanu nodded once, then dialed. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Keanu explained the situation. A child left in a freezer. No injuries, but potential trauma. An aunt who had been doing everything alone. A request for support, not judgment. Within minutes, a plan was in motion. A care worker would arrive discreetly. No uniform, no car lights. Just someone to listen and assess. When the call ended, Keanu turned to Teresa. They'll meet us at the restaurant, he said. Not with handcuffs, with questions, with help. Teresa nodded again, this time slower, firmer. Keanu stepped out and walked around to open her door. She stood on shaky legs, but taller than before. They walked together through the rain and back into the side entrance of the building. The silence of shame had lifted. It was being replaced by something new. Hope. The break room light was still flickering as they entered. The boy, Noah, was sitting up now, legs curled under the blanket. He looked up quickly as they stepped inside. His eyes found Teresa first. Tia, he said, his voice still weak. She rushed to him, kneeling at the couch, her hands trembling as they cupped his cheeks. Oh, baby, she whispered. I'm here. I'm so sorry. Noah didn't cry. He just leaned into her touch, burying his face into her shoulder. His arms wrapped around her waist, holding on like she was the only thing in the world he trusted. Keanu stood back, letting the moment belong to them. I didn't mean to, she said again, tears falling onto his hair. I was supposed to come back. I thought it would be quick. I didn't mean to forget you. It was cold, Noah whispered. I know, she said. I know. And I'm so sorry. They stayed like that for a while, just breathing, just holding. And Keanu watched. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush. Eventually, Teresa turned her head and met his eyes. Thank you, she said softly. Keanu gave a small nod. We'll figure it out, together. Noah looked up at him then. His eyes were still tired, but they held something new, recognition. You came back, the boy said. Keanu's throat tightened. He nodded again. I promised I would. A knock came at the break room door. Keanu walked over and opened it. A woman in a gray coat stood there, holding a clipboard, her face warm and calm. No badge, no uniform, just presence. Mr. Reeves? She asked. I'm here about the call. He stepped aside to let her in. Teresa tensed, but Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder. He's here to listen, he said. That's all. The woman knelt beside them, her voice low and kind. She introduced herself as Ms. Carey. She asked Noah if he was feeling okay. She asked Teresa if she'd had a chance to eat today. She didn't write much. She didn't make judgments. She just listened. After 20 minutes, she stood. I'm not making any removals, she said calmly. But I will open a support case. You'll have access to child care vouchers, emergency housing if you need it, counseling. And we'll check in regularly. Teresa nodded, stunned. Ms. Carey turned to Keanu. Thank you for handling this the way you did. He nodded. This place wasn't built to hide things. It was built to notice them. As the woman left, the room fell quiet again. But it wasn't the cold kind of silence anymore. It was the kind that followed a turning point. The kind that made you sit still, breathe deeply, and realize, for the first time in a long time, something might actually change. And no one would be left in the cold again. It was just after 1 a.m. when Blake Harrington walked through the front doors of the Ember Room like he owned the air around him. The rain hadn't touched him. His shoes were spotless, his coat dry, and his tie still knotted to perfection. Everything about him looked curated, sharp, deliberate, expensive. He didn't wait to be greeted. He strode across the empty dining room, past tables now cleared and chairs resting upside down. His polished soles echoed against the floor with every angry step. Keanu! Blake's voice rang out before he saw him. What the hell is going on? Keanu stepped out from the hallway behind the host stand, where he'd just finished speaking with the social worker. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair was damp from the rain. There was no expression on his face, only a steady calm. Blake, he said, you're here late. I just got a call from one of our backers, Blake snapped. Do you know how this looks? Word is spreading. A child in a freezer? Are you out of your mind? Keanu didn't flinch. I found him in our kitchen, he said. Yes, I heard, Blake said, lowering his voice but not his frustration. And we need to handle this. Quietly. No headlines. No statements. You understand? Keanu leaned slightly against the host stand. A boy was left in the cold, he said. In our building. During our shift. And no one noticed. Blake stepped closer, which is why we need to get ahead of this before someone else does. A reporter, an inspector, some Twitter account. One photo, one rumor, and it's over. You want to be remembered as the guy whose restaurant endangered a child? Keanu didn't answer right away. He stared at Blake, then slowly turned to the small frame that sat on the host stand. It was modest, an engraved plaque, black wood, gold lettering. Founder Keanu Reeves. He'd picked it up with one hand. I built this place, he said quietly, not just to serve food, to create something that meant something, to give people a space where they felt safe. And now it's at risk, Blake said, because of one mistake? You want to throw it all away over this? There are better ways to fix it, discreet ways. Keanu looked down at the plaque, then he turned it face down on the counter. You can run it without my name, he said. Blake blinked. What? If protecting the brand means protecting silence, Keanu said, then I want no part of it. The air between them thickened. Blake's mouth opened, ready to argue, but nothing came out. He wasn't used to people walking away from power, especially not their own, especially not this calmly. Keanu stepped around the host stand and walked toward the dining area. His pace was measured, unhurried, like a man who had already made peace with the cost. Blake followed. You and I had a deal, Blake hissed. Your name brings value. My money keeps it afloat. That was the agreement. Keanu stopped and turned. I agreed to build something honest, he said. Something that mattered more than menu designs and celebrity branding. And I protected it, Blake said. I've defended you in meetings. I've fought for this place. And now you're throwing all of that away? For what? A bleeding heart story? Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't step closer. He didn't have to. "A child was nearly lost in our freezer," he said. "That's not a story. That's real. And it happened under our roof." Blake looked around the restaurant, as if trying to find something to hold on to. "We can spin it," he said. "We say it was an accident. Isolated. We make a donation. We release a controlled statement. We keep this place from collapsing." Keanu shook his head. "You still think the danger is in the headlines. But the real danger was in what we didn't notice, what we chose not to see." Blake narrowed his eyes. "This is a business, Keanu. It lives and dies by perception. And perception nearly let a child freeze to death." Silence settled again, the kind that didn't belong in a restaurant. Blake straightened his jacket. "You'll regret this." "I already do," Keanu said. "I regret that it took a child shivering on a cold floor for us to pay attention." Blake turned to leave, his movements sharp. As he walked past the host stand, his eyes flicked down to the face-down plaque. He didn't touch it. Keanu remained in the center of the room, his eyes not on Blake, but on the freezer door visible through the swinging kitchen doors. That was the problem. It had always been there. Cold, closed, quiet, like most of the pain people carried. The world was too loud with noise to notice the silence. Blake reached the door and paused. "Let me know if you change your mind," he said. Keanu didn't respond. He just stood there, alone, but certain. As the front door clicked shut behind Blake, the hum of the building returned. The soft buzz of a light, the slow whir of the espresso machine powering down, the creak of pipes behind the bar. Keanu turned, walked back to the host's stand and picked up the plaque again. He didn't look at it. He just held it in his hand, then slid it into a drawer below the counter. Not hidden, just set aside, until it meant something again. He walked into the kitchen. The staff that remained had gathered near the far side of the room, quiet but alert. Some of them were still in aprons. Others had changed into street clothes, but hadn't yet left. No one had spoken above a whisper in over an hour. Hector stepped forward. "Everything okay?" Keanu nodded once. "It will be." They didn't ask what happened with Blake. They didn't need to. They saw it in Keanu's face, in the steadiness of his walk, in the absence of that plaque. Elena, the dishwasher, stood with a rag in her hands. She looked at him, hesitant. "What happens now?" she asked. Keanu looked toward the back hallway. The freezer was still closed. The logs beside it now had fresh sheets taped up. Hourly temperature checks, access logs, two-person entry verification. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. He turned back to the group. "From this moment forward," he said, "we don't measure this restaurant's success by revenue or press. We measure it by presence." They looked at him, unsure. "Presence," he repeated. "Noticing what we'd rather overlook. Asking when we usually stay silent. Interrupting when something doesn't feel right." The room was still. "I don't care if it's a kid in a freezer or a coworker too quiet for too long," he continued. "We check. Every time." A few heads nodded. Someone exhaled quietly. Relief? Maybe. He stepped forward again. No one gets left in the cold. Not physically, not emotionally, not ever. He let that settle. Hector looked at him. "What about the brand, the press?" Keanu shook his head. "If the truth costs us a headline, we're lucky. If it saves someone next time, it was worth it." No one applauded, no one needed to. They understood now. This wasn't just about business. It was about people. Later that night, long after the dining room had emptied again and the kitchen had gone quiet, Keanu sat at the last booth by the window. His coat hung beside him. His eyes rested on the freezer logs across the room. He didn't need his name on a plaque to know what mattered. He just needed to make sure no one ever froze in silence again. By 7 the next morning, the sky above Los Angeles had turned a shade of pale gray, the kind that hinted at rain but never quite delivered. Outside the Ember Room, the streets were quiet, the city still rubbing sleep from its eyes. But inside, the silence carried a different tone. The staff started arriving earlier than usual. No one had asked them to. There were no texts, no group message, no orders. Just something unspoken, a pull that brought them back. Keanu was already there. He had slept for a few hours on one of the office couches, his coat folded under his head. Now he stood at the edge of the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, marker in hand, posting the final piece of laminated paper to the wall beside the walk-in freezer. The sheet was plain, bold black letters on white. No one freezes. Not in silence, not in fear. Underneath it, fresh logs had been taped. Sheets for hourly freezer checks, employee initials, notes if something was off. Each staff member entering the freezer would do so in pairs, sign in and confirm when they left. Not bureaucracy, not paperwork. Just awareness. He stepped back and looked at it for a long moment, then turned as Hector entered through the back door, carrying a small box of kitchen towels. "Morning," Hector said. Keanu nodded. "Thanks for coming in early." "I couldn't sleep," Hector replied, setting the box down. "Didn't feel right staying home." Keanu didn't respond, but the look on his face said he understood. Within the next 30 minutes, more staff began trickling in. Line cooks, servers, bussers, even a bartender who wasn't scheduled until the evening shift. No one came in loud, no one brought music or jokes. They just arrived, changed into aprons, washed their hands, and waited. Elena came in last. The dishwasher had always been the quiet one. She wore the same dark hoodie every shift, hair tied up in a loose knot, headphones often tucked under her collar, even when they weren't playing anything. She moved through her tasks without complaint. Never late, never loud. But today she moved slower. Her eyes dropped to the floor as she approached the kitchen sink. Keanu saw her from across the room. "In here?" he called softly. She looked up, startled. He didn't summon her like a boss. He just nodded gently toward the prep station near the freezer. She walked over. Her hands were already fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve when she arrived. "I think I heard him," she said. Keanu didn't speak right away. He waited, letting her continue at her own pace. "A few days ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was in dry storage, grabbing towels. I thought I heard something. Crying, maybe? It was faint. I wasn't sure." She swallowed, eyes staring just past Keanu's shoulder. "I thought it was the ice machine, or maybe a pipe rattling, or maybe I was just tired, but I didn't check. I didn't say anything." Her voice caught. She folded her arms across her chest like she was bracing for a wave. Keanu didn't flinch. "You weren't the only one who didn't," he said softly. Elena blinked. "I've walked past that freezer 100 times this month," Keanu continued. "Sometimes late at night, sometimes just to think. I've stood outside it with a glass of water in my hand and told myself everything was fine because it was quiet." He looked at her, not with pity, not with forgiveness, but with honesty. "I never asked what the silence meant." Elena's lip trembled. "I just thought it wasn't my place," she said. "I mean, I'm just the dishwasher. People don't expect me to speak up. They expect me to do the job, keep my head down, and not make things complicated." "I know," Keanu replied. "That's how we trained you. That's the culture we created without even saying a word." Elena glanced toward the laminated sign by the freezer. The words stared back. "No one freezes. Not in silence. Out in fear." She nodded slowly. "I should have checked." Keanu stepped a little closer. "I'd rather you be wrong and ask," he said, "than be quiet and carry this." She looked at him again, and something in her face softened. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly, like the weight wasn't entirely gone, but at least it had been seen. A few feet away, others had begun to gather near the prep line. They weren't eavesdropping, they were listening, openly now. No one was hiding behind burners or pretending to scrub pans. They stood with towels in their hands, cutting boards untouched, waiting. Keanu turned toward them. "Let's talk," he said simply. No one objected. They left the kitchen one by one, walking into the main dining room and forming a loose circle of chairs and stools around the center of the room. No one took charge, no one directed. It just happened. Keanu remained standing for a moment, then took a seat near the window, folding his hands together and waiting for the room to breathe. And slowly, it did. The first to speak was a young line cook named Bryce. He cleared his throat, glanced at his shoes, then finally said, "I saw Teresa clock in early a few times. She always looked tired, but I figured maybe she just liked getting ahead. I didn't ask." A server named Monica added, "I remember once she was carrying a backpack. I thought it was odd for a prep shift, but I didn't think twice." Another spoke up, then another. Little things, small signs, moments that didn't seem important until they were strung together. No one blamed Teresa. They blamed the culture of moving fast, staying quiet, and not looking too long at anything that might slow down the rhythm of survival. Keanu let them speak. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to lead the conversation. He just listened. When the room grew quiet again, he looked around. "There's no guidebook for what happened," he said. "But there's a reason we're all still here today. Not because we have to be, but because something changed last night, and we don't want to go back." He paused. "This isn't about blame. This is about awareness, about presence, about care." He turned toward Elena, who now sat at the far end of the circle. "Being the dishwasher doesn't make your voice smaller. It makes it essential. Because sometimes the people who are listening quietly are the first ones to hear what others miss." She looked down, her face pink with emotion, but she nodded. "We have to interrupt things now," Keanu said. "Even when it's awkward. Even when we're not sure. Especially when we're not sure." Hector raised a hand. "How do we know when we're overstepping?" Keanu smiled faintly. "If you're stepping toward care, you're never overstepping." More nods followed. The laminated sign on the wall, "No one freezes, not in silence, not in fear," seemed to grow heavier, but in the best way. By the end of the hour, no one wanted to leave, not because they weren't tired, but because for the first time, the silence in the room didn't feel empty. It felt held. Before they returned to the kitchen, Keanu walked over to the freezer and tapped the laminated sheet gently with his knuckle. Then he turned to them and said, "From now on, this isn't just policy, it's our promise." As the morning shift began, there was no music, no clatter, just quiet focus. But this time, it didn't feel distant. It felt awake. And behind every task, every station, every pair of eyes watching another, was something new. A choice to listen, a choice to notice, a choice to interrupt the silence before it froze someone out. For the first time in a long time, the Ember Room wasn't just a kitchen. It was a community becoming aware. The dining room looked different that afternoon, not because of the lighting or the furniture or anything physical, but because of how people were sitting. No tables between them, no corners to hide behind, just chairs in a circle, arranged deliberately with no front, no podium, no title cards. It felt strange at first, vulnerable, exposed. But that was the point. Keanu was the last to enter. He didn't take a seat in the center. He chose a chair along the side, just like everyone else. Same level, same eye line. The only thing that set him apart was the quiet weight he carried, and the fact that everyone there knew he'd chosen to carry it with them, not above them. No one had a script, there was no agenda, no handout. Just a clipboard resting on a nearby stool, waiting for signatures that would come later. Keanu looked around the circle, made eye contact with each person. There were line cooks and servers, hosts and dishwashers. Hector sat beside Elena, his arms crossed, not in resistance, but in thought. Bryce tapped his foot without realizing it. Monica leaned forward, hands laced together. Everyone was here. Keanu cleared his throat gently, but he didn't raise his voice. "I want to start by saying thank you," he said, "for coming back, for showing up, not because you had to, but because something in you said, "This matters." The room was still. "I've spent the last 24 hours asking myself how we got here," he continued. "How a child ended up in our freezer. How we missed it. How none of us saw the signs." He paused, then added, "And the truth is, it didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, in the space between orders and cleanup, in the silence we got used to, the ones we stopped questioning." Heads nodded, softly, hesitantly. "This restaurant was built to be a safe place," he said. "But somewhere along the way, we started confusing silence with safety." He looked toward the laminated sheet still visible on the far wall. "Men ends now." He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. "From today on, safety isn't just about food temperatures and sanitation logs. It's about people. It's about presence. It's about noticing." Elena looked down at her hands, but didn't hide. Monica's eyes glistened, but she didn't wipe them. Bryce stopped tapping his foot. No one spoke yet, but something had shifted, and Keanu knew it was time to let go of the microphone, even though he never picked one up. "You don't need permission to speak," he said. "Not here. Not anymore." And then, slowly, they did. The first to speak was Hector. He adjusted in his chair, looked down for a second, then met the eyes of the room. "I've been in kitchens most of my adult life," he said. "You keep your head down, you do your job, and if someone's not okay, you figure it's not your business." He let out a long breath. "But I keep thinking, what if it had been one of my daughters? What if they were hiding in a place like that and nobody asked why?" No one interrupted. "I signed Teresa in that night," Hector said. "Didn't ask why she was early, didn't notice the circles under her eyes. I just said, 'Thanks for covering,' and kept moving." "That's on me." He didn't cry, he didn't break, but his voice cracked enough to make it human. Monica spoke next. "I noticed she wasn't eating her staff meals," she said. "She'd wrap them up and take them home. I thought she was just picky." She blinked quickly. "Now I wonder if it was for the kid." A long silence followed. Then Elena spoke, quietly but firmly. "I used to think not causing problems was the best thing I could do. Stay out of the way, do my work. Don't speak up unless someone asks." She glanced at Keanu. "But now I see, not saying anything can be the biggest problem." There were nods, real ones, not just polite agreement, but the kind that came from something deeper. Keanu leaned forward again. "This isn't about guilt," he said. "This is about clarity. We can't change what happened, but we can change what happens next." He stood briefly and walked to the clipboard. He held it up. "This is our first commitment," he said. "It's not legal, it's not mandatory, it's just a promise. One line." He read aloud. "Rule 1. Silence is not safety. If something feels off, we speak. If someone seems unwell, we check. If a space is too quiet for too long, we open the door." He set the clipboard on the center stool and walked back to his seat. "You don't have to sign today," he said. "You don't even have to sign at all. But if you believe in it, if you feel it matters, write your name." He looked around the circle. Not as employees, as people. A long pause followed. Then Bryce stood up, walked to the clipboard, picked up the pen, and signed. After Bryce, Monica stepped forward, then Elena, then two more. One by one they approached the clipboard. Some wrote their names without a word. Others lingered, looking at the rule as if weighing its weight. No one was forced, no one was praised, but each signature added something invisible to the room. Trust. Keanu stayed seated, watching them. He didn't rush. He didn't add his name first to set an example. He waited until everyone who wanted to sign had done so. Only then did he rise, step forward, and write his own name at the bottom. When he finished, he set the pen down gently. "That clipboard will live on the wall," he said, "not behind glass, not in an office, right here in the kitchen, where everyone sees it." He turned back to the group. And starting next week, we launch something new. Empathy hours. Every month, paid time off the floor. For anyone who wants to talk. No agenda, no forms. Just a human check-in. A murmur of surprise moved through the circle. I've also spoken to a therapist who'll be offering weekly drop-ins, Keanu continued. Nothing formal, no diagnosis. Just someone to listen. To any of us. Hector raised an eyebrow. Even us managers? Especially you managers, Keanu said. Laughter followed, soft but real. For the first time in days, the room felt light again. But it wasn't false. It wasn't the kind of lightness that floats away when pressure returns. It was the kind that comes from shared weight. Keanu looked at them once more. This is how we rebuild, he said. Not by pretending it didn't happen, but by making sure it doesn't happen again. He walked back to his seat, folded his hands, let silence fall for a moment. Not the cold kind, the kind that invited breath. Someone whispered, "Thank you." But Keanu didn't respond with words. He just nodded. One slow, steady motion. Outside, the clouds had started to shift. A hint of light crept across the floor through the front windows. In the distance, a bell chimed faintly, someone coming through the alley door with deliveries. But no one jumped, no one panicked, because they knew. If someone didn't respond, someone else would. If someone didn't check, another would. And if someone stayed too quiet for too long, a chair would already be waiting in the circle, with a clipboard nearby, and a rule that mattered more than any manual ever written. Silence is not safety. And this team, this strange, stitched-together family in aprons and stained uniforms, had finally decided they would never let anyone freeze again. The morning after the circle meeting, something small but unmistakable appeared on the freezer door. A handwritten sign taped with clear packing tape, written in thick black marker. This freezer holds food, not people. There was no name signed at the bottom, no announcement made. Just the sign. Clean, simple, bold. No one claimed it, but everyone noticed. By noon, someone else had added a note beneath it in red ink. If you hear the bell, check. The words looked rushed, like they were added on break, maybe written with a borrowed pen. But again, no one took credit, and no one tore it down. It stayed. And something about its presence changed the temperature in the kitchen. Not the physical cold, but the atmosphere of awareness. People glanced at the door more often. They didn't linger in silence. They looked at each other differently. Keanu saw it happen from a distance, not in some big dramatic moment. In the little things, a prep cook asking a dishwasher if they'd eaten, a line cook offering to cover someone's break without being asked, a server quietly taking over a section for a host who looked overwhelmed. It wasn't heroics, it wasn't grand, it was human. Hector approached Keanu near the pass line that afternoon, a clipboard in his hands and a thoughtful look on his face. "I pulled Teresa's last few weeks of clock-ins," he said quietly. Keanu turned toward him. "She's been showing up early almost every shift, sometimes by 45 minutes, sometimes more than an hour, and not just once or twice. It's been like this for nearly 3 weeks." Keanu took the clipboard and scanned the data. Each entry was there, time-stamped, accurate, but somehow missed. "She was using the time to hide the boy," Keanu said. Hector nodded. "That's what I think. Maybe not every day, but definitely on the nights she knew she wouldn't have coverage. She was trying to hold both worlds together." "No one asked why she was early?" Keanu asked. "No," Hector said. "We thought she was just eager. She always got a head start on prep, stayed out of the way. Honestly, she was what we thought of as ideal, quiet, efficient, invisible." Keanu's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in quiet reflection. "Invisible," he repeated. He handed the clipboard back to Hector. "Ends here." Hector nodded. "We're rewriting the orientation materials. The word efficiency comes up 27 times. The word well-being comes up once. I'm changing that." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you." And then they both turned, looking again at the handwritten signs on the freezer. No one freezes. Not in silence. And now, not in invisibility either. Later that same day, Elena hung a dry erase board above the hand-washing sink just outside the freezer corridor. No one asked her to do it. She used masking tape to secure the corners and wrote across the top in big letters, "Check-in corner, how are you really?" Underneath, a row of names had been pre-written in black. Bryce, Monica, Hector, herself. A line beside each. Nothing mandatory, just space. By 3 p.m., 3 people had written something. Bryce. Little tired, headache, but better. Elena. Slept more. Thank you for asking. Monica. Worried about home stuff. Grateful for today. No one commented out loud, but every time someone washed their hands, they saw it, and they thought about it. Keanu passed by the board just before the pre-dinner rush. He didn't write anything that day, but he paused. He read every line, and he smiled. He didn't need to be the center of this change. He just needed to let it grow. As service started, something else became clear. The tempo of the restaurant had shifted, not the speed. Orders still moved fast, dishes still left on time, but the atmosphere had softened. It was in the way people made eye contact, the way they offered water before someone had to ask, the way Hector walked through the kitchen not looking for mistakes but for tension. And when he saw it, he asked, not what's wrong, but what do you need? Bryce caught Keanu near the soda machine mid-shift and said, "It feels weird." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Not bad," Bryce clarified, "just less pressure. Like I'm still working, but I'm allowed to notice stuff." Keanu smiled. "That's the goal." Bryce looked toward the freezer. "I heard the bell yesterday and checked," he said. "It was just a box that shifted and hit the door, but I still checked." "Good," Keanu said. "Keep doing that, even if it's nothing?" "Especially if it's nothing." And Bryce nodded like something settled into place. Later that night, after the last plate was served and the dishwasher began its last cycle, Hector gathered the team for a quick update. Instead of the usual kitchen reminders, restock produce, sharpen knives, he passed around new safety badges. They were simple, black lanyards with a laminated card. On one side, the Ember Room logo. On the other, "You are not alone. If you see something, ask. If you feel something, speak. If you're unsure, check." Below that, a single line. Rule 1. Silence is not safety. As everyone read the card, there was a stillness in the kitchen. Not heavy like before, but thoughtful. Keanu stepped forward holding one of the badges in his hand. "We're not trying to become a therapy center," he said. "We're still a restaurant. But we're also people. And that comes first now." He handed the badge to Monica. She clipped it on immediately without hesitation. "From this point on," Keanu continued, "this isn't just a uniform accessory. It's a permission slip. To care, to ask, to check in, to interrupt." He turned to Elena. "You said you didn't know if you had the right to speak up. I want this to remind you that you always do." Elena looked down at her badge, then up again. She didn't say anything, but her expression said enough. Around the kitchen, others began clipping theirs on too. It wasn't mandatory, but by the end of the night, every badge was worn, not for compliance, for connection. Keanu watched them, his hands folded in front of him. There was no speech left to give, no grand finale. Just this. Small moments of change, adding up to something lasting. As the staff began filtering out, Hector lingered near the walk-in. He glanced toward the freezer, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. He taped it to the freezer door beside the other 2 notes. This one was typed, laminated. "Door opens every hour, and hearts even sooner." He turned and saw Keanu watching him. "I figured we'd keep a little poetry in the policy," Hector said with a shrug. Keanu smiled. "It works." Then they both stood there in silence. Not the cold kind, not the old kind. The kind that held room for meaning. At 11:47 p.m., the bell above the freezer chimed once, metallic, sharp, echoing down the corridor. Everyone in the kitchen looked up. A prep cook named Joel moved toward it first, hands still wet from scrubbing the slicer. Elena followed right behind. Neither spoke. They just opened the freezer, looked inside, checked every corner, and closed it gently. Nothing inside but boxed spinach and trays of frozen pasta. They returned, nodded once to Hector, and continued cleaning. No one applauded. No one needed to. Because that was the culture now. If you heard the bell, you checked. If someone looked off, you asked. If the silence lasted too long, you broke it. With kindness, with presence, with a reminder that no one freezes here anymore. Not in the cold, not in their fear, not ever again. The care center sat tucked behind a row of oak trees on a quiet street a few miles from the Ember Room. There were no signs with bright colors or cartoon logos, just a simple blue plaque by the front entrance and a short walkway leading up to the glass doors. Keanu parked around the corner and walked the rest of the way. No one followed, no camera crews, no handlers, just the soft crunch of gravel beneath his boots and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. Inside, the waiting room was painted a pale yellow, with a few posters on the walls about nutrition and child development. The overhead lighting was too bright, and the vinyl chairs made a soft squeak whenever someone shifted. In the corner, a fish tank bubbled quietly, filled with tiny orange and silver shapes, swimming in lazy circles. Keanu sat in the back, his hands folded tightly in his lap. A young woman in a navy sweater approached him after a few minutes. "He's in the playroom," she said with a small smile. "He's been asking if the man with the long coat was coming back." Keanu stood slowly and followed her down a short hallway. The playroom smelled like crayons and apple juice. Colorful floor mats covered most of the space, and shelves lined the walls, filled with stuffed animals, plastic dinosaurs, and puzzles with missing pieces. A cartoon played silently on a mounted television in the corner. Noah sat near the window, cross-legged on a rug, a small pile of crayons beside him. He was hunched over a sheet of construction paper, tongue sticking out slightly as he focused. He hadn't noticed Keanu yet. The social worker nodded gently and stepped aside. Keanu approached slowly, crouching a few feet away. Noah looked up, eyes wide. For a second, he just stared. Then, without smiling, without speaking, he held up the piece of paper. "I made this," he said. Keanu leaned forward. "Can I see?" The boy nodded and handed it to him with both hands, careful not to bend the corners. It was drawn in simple strokes. Blue crayon lines for the walls of the freezer, a tall figure with a brown coat, carrying a smaller one wrapped in a blue blanket. Behind them was a rectangle with an X through it. And above it all, in shaky block letters, the word safe. Keanu stared at it for a long moment. He didn't speak. His throat tightened, and he could feel the edges of his composure begin to blur. "This is beautiful," he finally said. Noah shrugged slightly. "You kept me warm." Keanu folded the picture gently, almost reverently, and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat like it was made of glass. "I'm glad you're okay," he said. Noah looked down. "Is my aunt in trouble?" Keanu paused before answering, then chose his words with care. "She made a mistake," he said. "But she never stopped caring, and that matters." Noah nodded slowly, still watching his hands. "She was scared." "I know," Keanu said. "But now there are people helping her, and you. No one's alone anymore." There was a long pause. Noah didn't look up, but his fingers started moving across the carpet, tracing invisible lines between the fibers. Keanu reached into his coat again, this time pulling out a small notebook and a pen. He flipped to a clean page and scribbled something down. "I can't always be here," he said, "but if you ever need to talk, they can help you. Send a message back." He tore the page out, folded it twice, and handed it to the social worker who had returned to the doorway. She glanced at the note, smiled, and tucked it into a file. Noah glanced at her, then at Keanu. "Are you really famous?" he asked softly. Keanu smiled just a little. "Some people say that." The boy frowned. "But you didn't bring cameras." "No," Keanu said. "I didn't come here for anyone else to see. I came for you." There was something in Noah's face, something that shifted at those words. Not relief, exactly, but recognition. The kind of understanding that doesn't need to be explained. He stood up slowly, walked forward, and wrapped his arms around Keanu's middle. Keanu didn't move at first. Then he gently placed a hand on the back of the boy's head and closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't promise anything out loud. He just stayed there, holding the boy, as the quiet hum of the playroom filled the background. Eventually, Noah stepped back, his hand still resting on Keanu's coat. He looked up. "You're not like the people on TV," he said. "No," Keanu replied. "I try not to be." "Will you come back?" Keanu knelt again, eye level now. "I can't promise when," he said, "but I can promise I won't forget." Noah nodded once. That was enough. Keanu stood, adjusted his coat, and turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused, the picture in his pocket pressed lightly against his chest, the folded paper's corners brushing against the lining. He looked back once. Noah had returned to the floor, already picking up another crayon, this time green. The outline of something new was beginning to form on the paper. It wasn't a freezer. It wasn't a coat. It looked like a tree. Keanu stepped into the hallway. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. The waiting room was empty now. The receptionist nodded at him as he passed, and he gave a quiet nod in return. Outside, the air had warmed slightly. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, streaking patches of light across the pavement. Keanu walked to his car in silence. Before getting in, he opened his coat and removed the drawing. He unfolded it gently, flattening the creases with the back of his hand. He stared at it for another long moment, then folded it again, slower this time, and slipped it back into the pocket closest to his heart. It wasn't just a picture. It was a vow, unspoken and unbreakable. It was a Wednesday, 2 days after Keanu visited the child at the care center, when the bell rang again. Not many people heard it the first time. The kitchen was busy, with dishes clattering and pans sizzling, but those who did hear it froze in place. A short, metallic ding-ding, like a call no one could afford to ignore anymore. The staff paused mid-step, mid-chop, mid-pour. A hush fell over the kitchen. In the back office, Keanu was discussing shift rotations with Hector. They'd just updated the new employee orientation folder, now including sections on emotional safety and silent signals. They both heard it too. And they didn't hesitate. Keanu moved quickly through the back corridor and reached the walk-in freezer. The checklist was marked clear just 30 minutes earlier. Still, he placed his hand on the handle, paused for half a second, and opened the door. The cold hit him instantly, but his eyes searched first. Then he saw him. In the far corner, crouched down between boxes of frozen pastries and prepped vegetables, was a small figure, shoulders hunched, arms locked around knees, body shaking. It wasn't Noah. It was Javier, the new teen prep cook, 17 years old, always early, always quiet. He wasn't shivering from the cold. He was trembling from something deeper. Keanu stepped in and closed the door gently behind him. No rush, no raised voice, just presence. He lowered himself to the floor, careful not to startle. He kept his distance, but sat in Javier's line of sight. "Javier," Keanu said softly. "You're okay. I'm here." There was no response. Javier didn't even flinch. His face was buried between his knees. His breath came in sharp, fast bursts, the kind that meant fear had overpowered logic. Keanu recognized it instantly. He took off his coat and slowly pushed it forward across the cold floor. "No pressure," he added, "but if you're cold, this might help." He didn't speak, but his hand slowly reached out. Fingers touched the coat. Then clutched it like a rope thrown into deep water. That was enough. Keanu stayed right where he was, watching Javier breathe, watching his body start to ease. Slowly, like waves calming after a storm. He didn't rush to ask what happened. He didn't rush to fix it. Instead, he offered the one thing most people forget to give: time. Javier's breathing slowed slightly. Then, in a small voice, he whispered, "I couldn't breathe." Keanu nodded, not speaking yet. I messed up the onions," Javier continued. "I was slicing too fast. The supervisor yelled, said I ruined 2 trays, that I was wasting product." Another gasp. "He said I'd never make it here." Keanu's eyes didn't leave him. His posture didn't shift. He stayed grounded. "I didn't know what to do," Javier admitted. "I didn't want to cry in front of them." Keanu waited a second longer, then finally said, "So, you came here?" Javier nodded without looking up. "I thought it would be quiet. I thought no one would notice." Ebley noticed. Javier's breath hitched again. "You thought you'd be alone," Keanu continued, "but someone heard the bell. Someone came." Javier blinked. "I thought I'd get fired." "You won't," Keanu said gently but firmly. "Not for this." Javier clutched the coat closer. "But I ran." "No," Keanu said. "You retreated. There's a difference. You didn't run away from work. You ran from hurt." The freezer was quiet again, but it didn't feel cold anymore. "I thought I had to be perfect," Javier whispered. "Everyone here moves so fast, knows everything. I mess up one thing and you're human," Keanu interrupted softly. "That's not a flaw. That's reality." They sat in silence again. Then there was a gentle knock on the freezer door. One soft tap. Keanu opened it slightly. Elena stood outside, holding a fleece blanket and a thermos of warm tea. "I heard the bell," she said. Keanu stepped aside. "Come in." Elena entered, not speaking to Javier until she got close. She knelt down and held out the tea. "No sugar," she said, "just like you asked yesterday." Javier looked at her, stunned, then slowly took the cup. He sipped. His hands shook less now. "Why did you come?" he asked her. "Because you rang the bell," Elena said simply. "People who'd rush out to help in rehab." She helped him wrap the blanket around his back. "People don't always know how to ask for help with words," she continued. "But now we know other ways to listen." They stayed like that for several minutes. Then Hector appeared in the doorway. He didn't step in, just waited. Keanu turned. "Can you hold the kitchen for another 20? Hector nodded. "We've got it." Javier finally looked up. "I thought no one would care." Elena responded first. "We care more than you think," Keanu added. "But you helped remind us how to show it." Eventually, Keanu helped Javier stand. His legs were stiff, but he didn't fall. Elena held the door as they stepped out together. In the kitchen, everyone had resumed working, but more slowly. Eyes followed them, not with judgment, but concern. Not with gossip, but quiet understanding. Bryce stepped forward from the salad station and handed Javier a new apron. "We ironed it for you," he said without fanfare. Javier blinked in surprise. "You didn't have to?" "I know," Bryce replied. "That's why we did." Keanu led Javier to a chair in the break area. Sat beside him, not hovering, just near. Then he stood and walked to the whiteboard posted beside the freezer. He picked up a red marker and wrote one new sentence. "Today, the bell rang and someone answered." Underneath, someone else wrote, "We freeze food, not people." Later that night, Keanu walked the kitchen once more. Quiet, peaceful. The bell hadn't rung again. He passed the freezer and paused. There, taped gently to the inside of the door, was a note in Javier's handwriting. It read, "Thank you for not walking past." Keanu folded it once and placed it in his pocket, not for show, but to carry the weight of the reminder. Silence isn't emptiness. It's a signal, one we now choose to answer. The change didn't start with an announcement. It started with silence. One morning, a clipboard appeared on the break room table. No label, no instructions. At the top of the page, in clean black ink, were just 2 words. "How are you?" Underneath, there were simple boxes: tired, hopeful, anxious, calm, angry, lost. And beside each one, a line: to write something. If anyone wanted to. No name was required. No obligation. By lunch, 5 staff members had quietly checked the tired box. 2 more had marked anxious. Someone left a single scribbled note. Still breathing. Keanu had placed it there himself, quietly, before the kitchen opened. By the next day, the clipboard had its own space near the time clock, and a second page was added, then a third. Nobody talked about it out loud, but everyone saw it. And over time, it filled with more than checkboxes. It held sighs, jokes, questions. One person wrote, "Is it okay that I cried in the walk-in today?" Another responded underneath, "Yes, I've done the same." Later that week, a sign appeared above the sink. "If you need to talk, text this number." No paperwork, no names, just support. It linked to a local nonprofit counseling line. Keanu had partnered with them in secret. No press release, no interview, just a resource tucked into a corner, a new kind of presence. The message was clear. No one would be ignored here. That same week, Elena began placing small blank notebooks around the building, one on the pastry shelf, one near the staff lockers, one tucked behind the seasoning rack. On the inside cover of each journal, she'd written the same sentence in her careful script. "This space belongs to your story." No one was told what to do, but the books started filling up. One cook left a haiku about peeling carrots. A dishwasher drew cartoons about Bryce's habit of singing off-key during the night shift. Someone wrote a letter to their childhood self that ended with the words, "You made it," and "I'm proud." Keanu read each entry when no one was watching. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he just folded the page corner quietly. He didn't add his name. He didn't need to. Instead, he kept showing up at 5 a.m., always before anyone else. He left water bottles where he knew staff would forget. He replaced a broken coffee pot without saying a word. He swapped out the overhead light in the break room because someone scribbled too bright on the bottom corner of the clipboard. And every Friday, he sat in the kitchen corner for 1 hour. No meetings, no instructions, just presence. Some weeks, someone would sit with him. Other times, they'd nod from across the room. It didn't matter. What mattered was the door stayed open. So did he. At the same time, a deeper shift was spreading across the building. Javier, now weeks into therapy, had stopped flinching every time someone called his name. One afternoon, he brought in homemade cookies and handed them out with shaking hands. Elena hugged him without asking first. Bryce complimented the flavor, then left a thank you note inside Javier's locker. That note simply read, "You're not invisible here." By early summer, the freezer itself, once a cold reminder of fear, became something else entirely. A clear window had been installed on the door. That small addition changed everything. Now, no one could walk by without seeing inside, and inside, a soft blue light glowed day and night. The old metal bell, once forgotten, had been wired to a blinking red signal light. If the door stayed closed for more than a few minutes, the light blinked gently. Not an alarm, just a signal. Next to the freezer, someone taped a printed page on the wall. "We freeze food, not people." Under it, Someone else had written in red marker, "If the light blinks, check." Every time. That message became a mantra, spoken, whispered, lived. One afternoon, Keanu noticed something else had been added beside the kitchen safety chart. A new list, printed in bold font. It was titled, "Rules That Matter." 1. Check in with each other. 2. Silence doesn't mean fine. 3. If someone disappears, find them. 4. If you don't know what to say, just sit beside them. 5. Never walk past the blinking light. At the bottom, it read, "If you work here, you're not just a team. You're a witness to someone else's fight. Honor that." Keanu stood reading it for nearly a full minute. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out Noah's drawing, the one of the tall man carrying the boy out of the freezer, with the word "safe" written in block letters. He taped it just above the lip. The message was no longer abstract. Who was living in the walls? Elena, meanwhile, had expanded her journal project. Once a week, staff now had the option to sit in a circle after hours, reading from their notebooks if they chose to. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried, sometimes they just sat and passed tissues in silence. And every time, someone would write afterward. This helped. Javier began volunteering to help lead the warm-up prep, chopping, portioning, greeting new staff. He wasn't the quiet kid in the corner anymore. One afternoon, he taped a sticky note above the sink. It said, "Even onions can't make me cry now." Hector, who once ran the line like a battlefield, now checked the freezer bell himself before closing. Every night, without fail, and Keanu, he stayed, not as the owner, not as a movie star, but as someone who had learned that leadership wasn't volume, it was attention. Not commanding, but noticing. Not instructing, but remembering the sound of a bell, the weight of a coat, the silence of a boy who once nearly disappeared behind a stack of frozen peas. This was no longer just a restaurant. It had become a quiet revolution, built not on speeches, but on second chances. And this time, no one would be forgotten in the cold. Not anymore. Teresa stood in the back hallway of the Ember Room, holding a folded piece of paper in her trembling hands. It wasn't a termination notice. It wasn't a warning. It was a new schedule. One line was underlined at the top: orientation lead, community and crisis support. She didn't understand it at first. When Keanu had called her in, she expected judgment. She expected to be dismissed, or at best, quietly removed from the schedule. But instead, he had looked her in the eyes and said, "This isn't punishment, this is trust." Teresa blinked at him through her tears. "You're not the mistake you made," he told her. "You're the love that brought your nephew with you in the first place. You were drowning. We all missed it. That changes now." Now she had a desk in the corner of the back office, near the supply lockers. She didn't give lectures or PowerPoints. Instead, every new staff member sat with her for 30 minutes before their first shift. Just one-on-one. A conversation, no script. She told them the truth. That the freezer used to be just cold steel and shelves. That one night, a child had been forgotten. That she was the one who had left him. That she had thought she had no other choice. And that since that night, no one here believed in silence anymore. Most of them stared wide-eyed, unsure of how to respond. Teresa always ended the same way. "You don't have to be perfect here," she said, "but don't ever be quiet if someone's drowning, including yourself." Some asked questions. Some said thank you. Some just nodded, deeply. But every single one remembered. And that was the point. Meanwhile, a quiet revolution continued around her. The new culture at the Ember Room didn't center on productivity charts. It was about presence, support, response. Elena and Javier had joined her to build what they called the Red Apron Sessions. Every Thursday evening after close, the staff gathered in the break room. No uniforms, no job titles, just people sitting in chairs, sharing real life. Sometimes they discussed parenting struggles. Other times, breakups, panic attacks, lost sleep, dreams deferred. Someone once talked about trying to save for college. Another confessed they couldn't afford bus fare home. No one laughed. No one judged. Someone always spoke up and said, "I've been there." Someone always offered help. Even Blake, the flashy investor who once argued for silence, had donated to the project anonymously. Keanu knew, but said nothing, letting him grow on his own terms. The most touching moment came when Hector stood up during one red apron session. Hands clasped tight, voice low. He admitted he'd been the first one to tell Teresa to just figure it out weeks before the incident. He hadn't meant it cruelly, but he hadn't followed up either. "I thought silence was respect," he said. "I know now it was absence." He turned to Teresa. "I'm sorry." She nodded, eyes wet. "Thank you." No applause followed, just a heavy, healing silence, the kind that meant something real had landed. Outside of the kitchen, something else had quietly begun to blossom. Noah, now 6 years old, had been enrolled at a small elementary school just 4 blocks from the restaurant. The registration had come through a charity program, but what no one except the principal knew was who funded everything behind the scenes. New shoes, a backpack with his favorite cartoons stitched on the pocket, pencils, crayons, notebooks, even lunch money for the year. Each item was paid for with a different credit card, quietly, anonymously. The name on the donation paperwork simply said, "For the boy who drew hope." Noah thrived. His teacher noted he was quiet but observant. He loved art class. He hated loud noises. But every time someone touched his shoulder gently, he smiled. His drawings often included 2 figures, one small, one tall. The tall one always had a coat draped over the little one. One morning he brought in a piece of paper with a red and gold restaurant on it. He pointed at it proudly. "That's where my family works," he said. The other children clapped. Back at the Ember Room, Teresa started bringing him by on Friday afternoons, just for an hour. Not as a secret, not as a burden, but as family. He sat in the break room coloring while the staff closed up. Elena would sneak him cookies. Javier would show him how to fold napkins into little swans. Bryce taught him how to balance a spoon on his nose. And Keanu, always watching quietly from the side, would smile and nod when Noah waved at him. Sometimes Noah would leave behind drawings, little pieces of his new world. One day, he sketched the freezer with a big red heart taped to it. The next, he drew a circle of people holding hands around a table. Above them, a speech bubble read, "No one's cold here." The drawing was taped near the office door. Below it, Teresa wrote, "This story is not our shame, it's our beginning." It became the unofficial motto of the restaurant. Guests started to notice. A local food critic wrote a glowing review of the food, but spent the last paragraph praising the culture. "It's like walking into a place that remembers your name before you speak," she wrote. "This is no longer just a dining room, it's a quiet promise." Eventually, more restaurants reached out. They wanted to know what the Ember Room had done differently. Keanu refused to give out a formal manual. Instead, he encouraged them to send someone over, not to study, but to listen. Because this wasn't about branding, it was about humanity. And in that humanity, Teresa found something she thought she had lost: dignity. Not restored by perfection, but by purpose. Noah, once nearly frozen and forgotten, now skipped through the back kitchen on Fridays with a laugh that echoed. Staff members smiled, nodded, handed him napkins, and told him stories. The crisis hadn't been buried. It had been transformed. And now, it lived in every shift, every shared glance, every answered bell. A second chance, born not from forgetting, but from choosing to remember better. The break room was quiet. The usual Friday hum of conversation had ended an hour earlier. The last of the staff had gone home. Only the soft hum of the fridge and the faint creak of an old chair remained. Keanu sat alone in that chair. No lights, no makeup. Just the overhead bulbs and a single phone resting on a stand. No crew, no script, no editor. Just one button, record. He took a deep breath, then pressed it. "Hi," he said gently, voice low and steady. "My name is Keanu Reeves, and I'm here in the break room of my restaurant, the Ember Room. It's not a press conference. It's not a statement prepared by someone else. It's just me." He paused. His eyes didn't dart or search for approval. They stayed locked on the lens. Something happened here a few weeks ago that changed everything. A little boy was found in our freezer. He was cold, alone, and nearly invisible to all of us, until the moment he wasn't. He let the words sit in the air, unpolished, heavy. His name is Noah, and what happened to him should never happen to anyone. He wasn't locked in there as punishment. He wasn't abandoned in anger. But that doesn't make it okay. He was left in silence, and we, all of us, were too busy, too distracted, too tired to notice the signs. He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to protect a brand, I'm here to tell the truth. Because the truth is, it didn't start with that night. It started before. When people showed up early, stressed and overwhelmed, and no one asked why. When a dishwasher heard something odd but didn't feel safe enough to say so. When managers ignored fatigue in the name of efficiency. When I stopped listening because things looked fine on the surface." His voice softened even further. "That boy survived, and because he survived, we got a second chance to become who we said we were. We got to rebuild, not our image, but our values." Behind him, taped to the cabinet, was a hand-drawn picture. A tall man with a long coat, holding a small boy in his arms. A walk-in freezer in the background. Above them, in red crayon, the word "safe." Keanu turned slightly to glance at it. "That picture," he said quietly, "was drawn by Noah. He gave it to me on my first visit to see him. I keep it here, not for sympathy, but for accountability." He looked back at the camera. "We didn't fire Teresa. We listened to her. We didn't bury the story. We grew from it. Our policies changed. Our priorities changed. And now, our purpose is different." He paused one last time. "If you work in a restaurant, in a school, in a hospital, any place where people can disappear behind noise or pressure or fear, I invite you to join us. Ask questions. Build systems, open your ears. Because silence is not safety." Then, with no music, no signature, and no logo, he reached forward and pressed stop. The video was uploaded without a press team, without a preview, and without a schedule. It was posted from the restaurant's small Instagram page, titled simply, "From Keanu, No Filter." Within the first hour, it had 3,000 views. By midnight, 70,000. The next morning, it had crossed 1 million. But the comments were different than most viral posts. There was no scandal-fueled rage, no marketing jargon, no empty apologies. Just humanity. Restaurant workers around the country started tagging their own teams. "This is how you lead." Someone finally said it. "I'd watching this. Been there." Within days, freezer check logs began appearing in kitchens across New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. A popular diner in Seattle posted a new sign above their walk-in. "This freezer stores ingredients, not people." If you hear something, check. A fine dining steakhouse in Atlanta launched what they called Noah Nights, a weekly evening staff huddle focused on mental health and emotional safety. They sent a thank you letter to the Ember Room. Teresa framed it and placed it beside Noah's drawing. Then came the phone calls. Journalists wanted to speak with Keanu. Networks asked for exclusive interviews. He politely declined every one. "The story's already been told," he said. "Now it's your turn to listen to your people." But he did make one quiet exception. A high school culinary teacher from Detroit sent an email. She said her students had watched the video together, then decided to change their classroom rules. They drafted a new list called the Warm Kitchen Code. Keanu wrote back with a handwritten note and a small donation to their student meal program. He didn't post about it. One of the students did. That post went viral too. It wasn't just restaurants anymore. Churches began hosting silent circles, safe spaces for community members to speak openly without fear of being interrupted or dismissed. A hospital in Oregon adopted a version of the Ember Room's freezer bell system for their medication storage, where staff now checked on each other as often as they checked supplies. Even Blake Harrington, the once critical investor, made a quiet move. He purchased 20 industrial freezers for shelters across the country, each equipped with heat sensors and safety buzzers. He sent one line in a text to Keanu, "Learning, thank you." The ripple kept moving outward. But at the Ember Room, the focus remained simple. Each new hire still sat with Teresa. Each Friday, Noah still visited with his crayons and quiet smile. Each Thursday, red apron sessions continued. And each night, the freezer door was opened, the space checked, and a hand gently ran across the words taped above. Silence is not safety. The story had become more than a mistake. It had become a mirror. And in a world full of noise, it reminded people that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what we hear, it's what we choose to ignore. But now, someone was listening. And because of that, others started listening too. One video, one voice, one boy, and 100,000 tiny, human choices to never let someone freeze in silence again. The chairs were always the same. Simple, black folding chairs with a few scratches and wobbly legs. But they were arranged differently now. No rows, no podium, no one standing above the rest. Just a circle. The first of these monthly meetings began 2 weeks after Keanu's video went viral. There was no announcement, no memo. Just a printed sheet on the staff board that read, "Thursday, after close. If you want to come, you're welcome." 12 people showed up. Hector was the first to speak. Not about food orders or shifts. He just said he hadn't slept well in weeks. He said the silence after Noah was found haunted him more than the noise ever had. Then he said he felt something shift, something slow but real. People nodded. No one spoke over him. No one rushed to solve it. They just listened. Elena shared next. Her voice trembled as she spoke about her own childhood, about moments when she wished someone had just asked her, "Are you okay?" She admitted she ignored Noah's whimpers because it reminded her too much of what she used to hide. Across the circle, someone whispered, "Thank you for saying that." And then came Teresa. She held her hands in her lap and spoke softly. She explained how she used to believe silence was strength, that hiding your needs made you reliable, that asking for help meant weakness. But now, she understood that her silence almost became someone else's pain. That night, the circle stayed for nearly 2 hours. No one checked their phones. No one interrupted. When it ended, they didn't say goodbye. They just stood, hugged gently, and left in quiet gratitude. By the second meeting, there were 18 chairs. By the third, 23. At each one, someone new spoke for the first time. One prep cook admitted they had been sleeping in their car, but never told anyone. Another employee shared their struggles with panic attacks, always masked by jokes and loud laughter in the kitchen. A server confessed that they'd almost quit before the freezer incident, not because of the work, but because they felt invisible. Each time, after someone shared, the circle clapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a gentle, open sound, like rain on soft ground. The kind of sound that says, "We hear you," and "We're still here." Javier had been quiet during every meeting, always present, always listening, but never speaking. Until one night. It was raining outside, and the kitchen smelled faintly of thyme and roasted garlic. The meeting had gone on for over an hour. Keanu sat in his usual place, not at the head but next to the dishwasher, hands folded in his lap. Javier cleared his throat. The circle fell silent. "I didn't freeze that night," he said. Everyone leaned in. "I thought I was. I thought hiding would protect me, but I wasn't frozen, not really. Because someone listened." No one moved. He looked across at Keanu, then over to Elena, then down at his hands. "I used to think silence was safer, but it wasn't. It was just louder on the inside." The moment Javier spoke those words, something shifted again, not just for him, but for everyone in that circle. Hector nodded slowly, wiping at his eyes with the edge of his sleeve. Elena reached across and placed her hand gently on Javier's. No words, just warmth. Keanu didn't say anything. He just exhaled, almost like a silent thank you. His eyes, slightly misted, met Javier's with quiet pride. There was no need to reply. The circle had already done what it was meant to do. The meetings continued, not out of obligation, but because people wanted to come. Some brought snacks. Others brought candles. A few began writing down thoughts in small journals and placing them in a shared folder titled, "If You Can't Say It Yet." Teresa became a regular speaker, not as a cautionary tale, but as a symbol of growth. She created a small guide for new hires titled, "What Silence Looks Like," listing subtle signs that someone might need help. It included drawings, stories, and quotes from the meetings. Even guests began to feel the difference. One regular customer left a note on a napkin that read, "There's something alive here, not just food, heart." Staff began showing up early, not because they were overworked, but because they liked being in the space. The kitchen became a place of motion and emotion. Orders were still filled, plates still passed, but now, in between, people asked each other how they were really doing. Not out of politeness, out of care. Javier joined a local community college, studying psychology part-time. He said he wanted to be someone who could hear what others couldn't say. He still worked at the restaurant 3 days a week, but his energy had shifted. He laughed more now. He listened even more. Noah's drawings still hung in the break room. They were rotated weekly, each one telling a story without words. The staff began using them to start meetings, each person saying what they saw in the picture. Sometimes it sparked laughter, sometimes tears. Always connection. The Ember Room, once known for its sleek decor and award-winning menu, now had a different reputation. It was known as the place where people didn't freeze. Not in the freezer, not in fear, not in silence. It had become something deeper than a restaurant. It was alive with intention, with grace, with a kind of invisible warmth that wrapped itself around anyone who walked in and said, "I'm tired," or "I'm scared," or simply, "Can we talk?" And the answer, always, was yes. Keanu still came to the meetings. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he didn't, but he was always there, always listening, because the truth was simple. One circle can change everything. One boy's silence had cracked open a world of noise, and from that a new kind of sound was born. The sound of people listening, the sound of people staying, the sound of people healing. Together. The restaurant had closed for the night. The dining room was dark, save for a few glowing sconces and the moonlight brushing against the front windows. In the back, the break room offered a quiet retreat. Just one small lamp, a single chair, and Keanu sitting by the window with a warm mug between his hands. The hum of the refrigerator faded into the background, like white noise. The stillness of the space wasn't empty. It felt intentional, like a pause at the end of a difficult but necessary sentence. On the table in front of him rested a single folded piece of paper. Its corners had softened over time, touched and refolded many times. He reached forward, slowly unfolded it, and laid it flat on the table. Noah's drawing. Done in bright crayons, it showed a tall man holding a small child beside a massive freezer. The freezer was blue and white, filled with cold colors. But the child glowed with warm tones, yellow, orange, and red, as if wrapped in sunlight. And above their heads, in big uneven block letters, the word "safe" floated like a shield. Keanu stared at it. This wasn't just a picture, it was a mirror, a truth, a reminder of what could have happened and what did happen because someone finally listened. That single word had come to mean everything. Safety wasn't a locked door or a checklist. It wasn't a perfectly run business or flawless schedules. It was attention, kindness, someone noticing. A sound echoed faintly from down the hall. The small bell above the walk-in freezer door. It was barely audible. But almost immediately, one of the newer staff, a young woman named Lacey, peeked her head out from the dish area. She turned toward the hall. Without being asked, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked calmly toward the freezer. Just to check. She returned moments later with a box of frozen peas. Nothing alarming, but she had checked. Keanu saw the entire moment from where he sat, and something in his chest released. That simple act had once been overlooked, ignored, unspoken, and now it was instinct. A shift had taken root. He smiled. Not the smile of victory, the smile of quiet change. He picked up Noah's drawing, folded it again with care, and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. That paper didn't need to hang in a frame. It lived closest to his heart. Keanu stood slowly, then turned toward the small mounted camera on the break room wall. It had been set up hours earlier, but he hadn't used it. He'd waited for the right moment. Now he faced it. The red recording light blinked softly. His voice was calm, steady, measured. "Silence isn't always safe," he began. "Sometimes it hides things we don't want to see. But if you hear the bell, if you sense something's off, don't ignore it." He looked down for a moment, letting the words settle. "Because someone might be waiting." He turned and walked out of frame, leaving only the sound of the faint humming light and the distant creak of the freezer door behind him. Keanu returned to his seat, not to speak more, but to finish the moment in quiet. The tea in his mug had cooled, but he took one last sip anyway. It wasn't about the warmth of the drink. It was about the rhythm of stillness. He had learned over the past few weeks that silence could be deadly, but it could also be sacred, if shared, if filled with truth. He leaned forward slightly, hands resting on the table. His expression wasn't rehearsed. There was no script, no makeup crew, no fancy lighting. Just a man in a chair in a break room, beneath a clock that had stopped ticking weeks ago but no one had bothered to fix. He spoke again, softly. "I've worked in a lot of places, and I've seen how people rush past each other. We don't mean to, but we're tired. We're focused on tasks. We're afraid to get involved, so we ignore things that feel too small to matter." He let that linger. But sometimes those things aren't small. Sometimes they're everything. He reached into his coat again and removed the folded drawing, placing it gently on the table. He didn't open it this time. He didn't have to. That boy in the freezer wasn't just cold. He was forgotten. And not because anyone wanted to hurt him, but because the world had trained us to look past people like him, like Teresa, like Javier. He took a breath. "I don't want that kind of world anymore. Not here, not in this place, not in any place I'm part of." Keanu paused again and looked directly into the camera. His eyes weren't pleading. They were honest. "If you're watching this, I don't want you to feel guilt. I want you to feel responsibility." He nodded gently. "Ask yourself, have you ever ignored a subtle cry for help?" The question didn't need to be shouted. It needed to be asked slowly, clearly, and left unanswered. At least for a moment. Then came the invitation. "If you believe we need to stop doing that, comment below. I hear the bell." He leaned back just slightly in the chair, his shoulders relaxing for the first time. Because that bell might not always be a sound, it could be a silence, a hesitation, a look. And when we choose to pay attention, we rewrite someone's story. We remind them they matter. He stood again, this time more deliberately. He walked past the break room fridge, then paused at the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time toward the camera. "Kindness starts in silence," he said, "but it ends in action." He left the frame. The camera lingered on the empty chair, the folded drawing still on the table. No music played, no text appeared on screen, just the quiet sound of the restaurant breathing. Faint footsteps, a soft clink of dishes in the kitchen, the creak of an opening door, and the bell. This time, someone was already walking toward it. And this time, no one was alone.